Hello and welcome to our Dispelling Homeschool Myth session. Today we are going to walk through some of the common misconceptions about homeschooling and maybe some doubts you've had yourself or somebody has brought to you that now you're concerned about. And we're going to just break all those myths and tell you what it's really like when you're homeschooling. So I am Sunny, I'm Sonlight's community manager, and I'm a homeschool mom of two kids who have been homeschooled with Sonlight since preschool. And the biggest myth that I experienced, I think at the time I had an only child, and I thought you had to have a big family to homeschool. And so when I started homeschooling, I thought, oh, well, this is a normal thing for people to do with only children. Well, I quickly learned that is not true. There are tons of only children who are homeschooled. And joining me today are Christy and Amber, and we're going to find out what their top myths were that they were wondering about when they started homeschooling. Amber, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Amber Severance. I'm a mentor on Sonlight's app and a consultant at conventions. I homeschool 5 children, have homeschooled 5 children. And I think when I first started homeschooling, probably the biggest myth that needed to be dispelled was that my children were going to be weird and they weren't going to be socialized. And I heard it all the time. Even a well-meaning neighbor, when I said I was going to homeschool, said, "Oh, I wish you wouldn't do that." Just sure that my children would turn out to be very odd.
Absolutely. I think a lot of homeschool parents hear that one for sure. Christy, what about you? What was the top myth that you were concerned about when you started?
What weighed on my heart was being ready to homeschool a child that was not typically developing. I felt pretty confident in homeschooling my typically developing children, but I had one who, there were different needs that he had that were not being met in the school that he was in fully. And I could see where I could do something about that. But still, there was just that hesitation and that, is this the best thing for him? I wanted what was best for him. And he graduates this weekend and it has been the best thing. But I think that was one of the biggest things weighing on my heart.
I love that. So yeah, that's proof that myth went right out the window. Yeah, so that's thrilling to hear that. But let's dive right in. We're actually going to start with the one that Amber mentioned, because I think it's one of the most frequently brought up, is that socialization piece. Everybody assumes that if you're homeschooling, your child is not going to be socialized. And I know when I talk to a lot of parents, even their young children, they're like, oh, I've got to get them in daycare or preschool or school so that they can be around other kids and become socialized. So what do you guys say to that?
Well, first of all, what does socialized mean? So that's one thing right off the bat. Do you learn how to be better at something by being with people at your own skill level and your own age or below? Is that what helps you to grow in your social skills and your social awareness? I don't think so. Most 3-year-olds don't learn many good things from other 3-year-olds. And that's kind of true all the way up as far as manners and speaking and all of that. I think another point that I would make is that I'm not chopped liver. I'm actually a person, human being. And when my children are spending time with me, my husband, and I had 5 children, obviously not all at once. So that those older ones just had one other sibling for a little bit. So all of that counts as socialization. We go to church. We have, time at the library, whatever, when they were little. So the socialization piece, I have more to say, but I'll let Christy chime in.
Yeah, I think you model that, you model being involved in, we have had times in our years of homeschooling where we were way too involved. We had too many things on our schedule and we had to pull back. And then we had other times where, it was like, oh, wow, we've been at home and we need, we might add some things to our schedule. So we've had, times where we've gotten off balance on both ends of the spectrum with, what we're involved in, what's on our schedule. But I think we can model this, very well for our children and help them kind of manage when we get too many things. Or I have some of the children in my house are extroverts and they want to be very, very involved in everything that's going on all the time. And every day there's a new, next week, I have a son right now who wants to go to 3 proms. Why would anyone want to go to, but he literally would love to go to 3 proms if he had the opportunity to. So, this is, and then I have another child who is desperate for home. If he's away from home for any length of time, he's like, are we going home now? When are we going home? And that's how he's been since kindergarten. So I think you have to balance each other's needs for time with others, but I don't think that I've met homeschoolers all across the country, and I've met public school children from all across the country, and there are all kinds of social situations with all of those children. Homeschooling doesn't make us especially unsocialized, or especially safe from any trouble with that. I think it's a different choice. It doesn't mean it's a myth that it necessarily means problems with socialization.
I would totally agree with what Christy's saying. And I think one of the biggest things when it comes to our children and their relationships with the broader world, a lot of it comes from what you do as parents, right? Are you engaged with people? Do you have people into your home? Are you a welcoming person? Do you foster healthy relationships with others? Your children watch that, they model that. Christy's so right. You are going to find children who are a little bit awkward in social settings, no matter what school choice there is. And some of it is just maturity and growing up. Some children take longer to bloom than others, right? It's time. And I think there's this thing, if you are looking at your children to make you look good from the time they're tiny, that's not okay. That's wrong, actually. Your children aren't put on this planet to make you look good. And so they are going to be awkward. They are going to struggle. And you're there to help them through that and to model it and to teach them and to help them. So it's really actually very beautiful, I think. So that's a myth that can also be dispelled. Yeah.
Excuse me.
There's a large, my guys are a part of a very large youth group that has children who are from public schools. And the very first time we had moved here, we were brand new. We were selling our house out of state. And we came in for an event, and my son was brand new to the group. He's in 6th grade, going into this huge group. And so I, talked to the check-in person and said, okay, I'm coming with him because he's new. We've just moved here. We didn't even know which building to go to, and basically I said, he is brand new. We are actually living here in temporary housing while we're selling our home out of state. And so I don't know if there's someone, do you know one of the kids that I could kind of introduce him to or something? Because this is a big, room of people. And she was like, it's going to be best if he brings a friend with him. And I was like, what? And this was all mostly public school kids. And that was her solution, was you need to really bring a friend with you if you're going to come into this group. It's, that's best if you just bring a friend with you. And I was blown away by that answer, as coming from being someone that welcomed people in the old, in our other state. I would have taken a new child and introduced him. But really, literally in that group, there was not a lot of socialization that happened. You were supposed to bring it was best if you brought a friend with you in that group. And so these are all, you would think that they would be able to socialize with a new person and welcome a new person, but that was not the solution. So I don't think that we have a corner on awkwardness with social situations in middle school.
Absolutely. And I love what one of you said about modeling. You as the parent get to model so many social things, because that's what I remember about my kids when they were little, is they could talk to adults even though they were little, because they had always been around adults. I was a young mom when I had my older child, so none of our friends had kids really yet. And so we would just take her along and she would talk with all of our friends. And, of course, now she's got friends who, are around the same age and all of that. But she learned very early to talk to adults. And it was something that she was actually complimented on. And people would be like, oh, do her teachers know how bright she is? Or look at her talking to these adults. And I'm like, yes, I do know. I'm homeschooling her. But part of the reason actually that I kept her out of school after we started homeschooling in preschool was that she was so social. And I remember my sister was very outgoing and extroverted like that. I was a quiet, serious kid, but she was the very outgoing child and was in trouble in elementary school all the time for talking in class. And when I saw my daughter coming up, who also had this very extroverted personality, I thought, oh no, she's going to go to school and they're going to tell her to be quiet and listen. And she, you know, is able to contribute to what they're saying and wants to. But I was like, school's going to crush this side of her where she's so confident and outgoing and all of that. And so we have found it to be the total opposite, that, you know, keeping her out of school actually allowed her personality to thrive. And then for my younger child, who is more quiet and serious, he learned, you know, because we were modeling the behavior, you know, would go to a restaurant. Okay, so say, can I please have the, you know, we would walk him through how to place his order, you know, and now at 9 years old, you can't tell that he was ever shy. You know, he's just a little quieter than his sister, but he still talks just fine to people. So yeah, I agree. I think that is a total myth that you, when you're homeschooling your kids, you get to demonstrate to them how to interact with people. You get to help them walk through those situations where they might be nervous, and their personalities really get to thrive in a situation that's more typical of adult life, right? You don't raise your hand at work before you say something. You don't, you know, have to be with people only your age your entire life. You know, all of those situations that in school are not really typical of adult life.
Sunny, you know, one other thing you said, which I love, you said, I have a daughter who's extroverted and I kept her home, right? I talk to so many moms who say, oh, my children just love people. I can't have them at home because they just need people. And I think it's so interesting because it's not as though at this age, school is the only place where there can be people, right? So you have, you know, 3 or 4 hours where you can get school done, and you get solid school done and get it done much faster than you would in a traditional school setting. And then you have the whole rest of the day to have them involved in other things, a dance class or acting class or a sports team or something else. Like the sky is the limit for the activities that a homeschooler can be involved in. I mean, you can get into way too many things, but it's kind of, I won't say silly, but I think that is a huge myth that the extroverted child shouldn't be homeschooled.
And my extrovert complained daily when he got in the car. I would pick him up in car line when he was in kindergarten, and he would get in the car and he would say, it was so ridiculous. Every day he would tell me about the lunchroom, and they had a red cup, and we had red cup for extra minutes today. He was watching the clock because what a red cup was no talking and so everybody sat silently and ate their lunch. And I got the reason they did this is because so many kindergartners threw away their lunch because they didn't have time to eat. They only had a short amount of time. So they were trying to get them to eat before they talked. And so that was the point of it. But he just thought it was the most horrible thing ever that we would have to sit here and eat and not speak to anyone like we're in prison, you know. And he complained every single day about that little rule. He said, we only had 5 minutes to talk, you know.
Well, and absolutely. And I feel the same way about active kids too. One of my favorite things about homeschooling is that they can move around, they can hang off the couch upside down, because same thing, little kids, sitting still and being quiet is not a normal behavior for small children. And so, yeah, they have to do those things at school, but when they're in your homeschool, they don't have to do that. But let's move on to the academic side. I know this was one that I actually heard from a family member who is a teacher and told me that eventually my kids would get to a point that mommy can't teach them everything because teachers are the experts and not the parents. Parents aren't qualified for this. What do you have to say to that?
I talked to my oldest son this week, and this is perfect for this. He's in a chemistry class that's pretty challenging, and he told me this week that he was helping people with the math part of things. And we did co-ops for almost every level. I mean, for a lot of different subjects is what I'm trying to say, but not for math. I did math at home every year until dual enrollment. When we got to pre-calculus, we did pre-calculus, but once calculus 1 came around, he went for dual enrollment at the local community college. And I could have done that at home. I just decided I wanted him to have an opportunity to do that in another environment. But he was able to do that at home with the tools that we have. That's the biggest thing. You don't have to have all of the every subject. You don't have to be an expert in every subject in order to teach your children. You know them best. You know what they need. You can, if you don't know, you're going to be the most apt to find what you need. And there are solutions and tools. I told someone this week that I don't think we do sentence diagramming. And then I found it on the website today. We do have Winston Grammar. It gives a good introduction to that. There are so many tools. Look at the website. Look at all of the options. There are videos that, in certain levels in high school that can help you, instructors that can help you. There are tools that solve every single problem in the book in case you get stuck. There are all sorts of opportunities in the high school level and beyond. And in the early years, whenever my son that had, he wasn't developing typically, just problem solving with him it was in the moment. There were times that was very tough, but I never gave up. I kept looking for solutions whenever I would run into a problem. And that's what we tend to do because there's love behind it. So that's a pretty strong power to get you where you need to go. And so I would just encourage you to be, to realize that you are the best teacher, I think, for your children.
I would, there's a couple things that I'm thinking. Some of the very best homeschoolers I've ever met, so impressed with their children, did not have education as their college background, but they love their children. They were lifelong learners and they figured it out. And there are so many resources. So for a parent that doesn't feel qualified, I would just encourage that. My story is that I was trained to be a secondary education teacher. Well, it doesn't matter what your background is, you're going to find a problem, because I was convinced that I couldn't teach my 4- and 5-year-olds to read. I was really, really nervous about those early years. Guess what? Not that hard. It's okay with the right resources. And just my 25-year-old is a great reader. She's working on her second master's degree right now. And so I think she's okay. And I got one that's in nursing school and one that's doing great in college, and still a couple more we got to figure out. But so that's one thing. You're always going to find a reason to feel unqualified. The second part of your question, Sunny, is, what do you do these other people, right? I remember a friend of mine who had taught 4th grade for years, and she wasn't teaching 4th grade at this time. And she looked at me and said, "What makes you think you're qualified to teach 4th grade?" And I was like, "Are you serious right now? Like, I think we can handle 4th grade. You guys, it's not rocket science." And I feel like there's so many people that act like teaching children, even through high school, it's like you have to be a nuclear physicist or something. That's just not true. And there's just so many resources, and you have the time, and you can take the time. You have the resources. It's not rocket science. And I've loved Sonlight for that, even just mapping out that path. I don't have to make it up. But you guys, crazy. The same 4th grade teacher told me she herself doesn't like to read. She's hardly read a book. She looked forward to book report day from her 4th graders to hear about good books.
Oh my goodness.
I know. And I'm like, and you think I'm not qualified to teach my 4th grade? What in the world? Okay. So anyway, you're going to hear it, and it doesn't matter. Even if you have a background in education, it's going to come back, Sunny. So I hope that's a little bit of encouragement to moms.
Well, and I want to piggyback off of something you both said. Christy mentioned the fact that you love your child. So you are extremely motivated to help your child succeed. This is something that obviously parents want what's best for their child. And even though there's great teachers out there, they have a whole class to manage. So they may not be able to put that time and effort into, your child the way that you can. And then, like you were saying, Amber, Sonlight lays it out. They make it so easy. And all of us have passed 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, right? Like that was the way I looked at it. I was like, well, I graduated high school. So why can't I, even though, yes, I don't remember the calculus I took my senior year, but can I relearn it? Absolutely, because I learned it once. It might be harder now because I'm older, but I always looked at it as I can relearn it along with my child, or like Christy, you mentioned dual enrollment. If they get to a point that they want to be heavily focused in something that's beyond what I want to relearn or can relearn, I can send them somewhere else for that particular class. But absolutely, I can read to them. I can talk about books with them. I love learning myself. So for me, it was never a question of, well, can I do this because I don't know everything right now? Because you really don't need to know everything when you're starting out with a preschooler.
And Sunny, I love what Lisa, one of the mentors at Sonlight, talks about the ministry of the outsider. And I think even for some moms, you have little people. I know we talk about getting extra help for high schoolers, but even if, let's say you have a whole boatload of little people at home and you have one that's struggling with reading, there probably is someone at your church or a grandparent or someone who would be willing to read with that child and listen to that child read to give them extra practice. It doesn't all have to be on you. And you can still homeschool and have 1 or 2 people that are helping with certain subjects and really make that a really special time. So yeah, it's out there.
I had a developmental pediatrician. You might be thinking that others, the way that others might feel about something is going to be a certain, you just might have preconceptions about what others might think about your desire to homeschool or your decision. And this was the case with a developmental pediatrician that we saw, and you had to wait for a year to get in to see him. And we had already established visiting him with our son before we decided to homeschool. And I had no idea how he was going to feel about it, but I mentioned it in an appointment, kind of almost stealing myself for what he might say, because you never know what experts are going to say. And he was thrilled. And he told me, I think this is the best thing you can do for your son. It's such a gift. I know it must be very scary right now, but if you could go 10 years out, I think you're going to be so happy with this decision. And he told me all the things that he experiences with kids that are in the public school system or in a private school. And he said, your son is not going to experience this whole list of things. And he went down the list of all of these concerns. And he said, I feel for students. And he said, I think you're going to be thrilled with this decision. So from an amazing developmental pediatrician in North Carolina, I will say, it felt amazing to me to just have that little bit of confidence, like that the fact that I was already confident that this is what I needed to do, but it helped me to have someone else saying this, I feel like this is what you need to do, and I think that we just don't know what we don't know, that whole list of concerns that come with the other choice. Once you make this choice, you don't really have to worry about, but there is a whole list of problems on that side. So,
well, and I think that's great what you said about sometimes we assume, the world's out to get us, almost like, oh, we're homeschooling, so people are going to think one certain way about us, or, they're going to say rude things, because a lot of times people do feel comfortable saying rude things, just like they do to women when they're pregnant, or, you're always going to be the brunt of rude comments at various points in your life, whether you want to or not. But I agree with you, Christy, that I've been pleasantly surprised oftentimes when I mention we homeschool and somebody says, oh, that's so great, I love that because of XYZ. And oftentimes they are experts in a field. And yeah, so I think we as homeschoolers should be careful not to walk into every room thinking, uh-oh, everybody's gonna, say something rude to us because we're the homeschool family. Because I think especially today, it's becoming more common and more popular to homeschool your kids. So I think there's even less of that even than, 30 years ago. So yeah, that's a great, very valid point there. What about the myth that homeschoolers are either super advanced? I think about, you're perfect SAT, ACT scores, going to Ivy League schools, or, something like that. Or
Winning the
they're
spelling
sitting at
bees.
home. Yeah, exactly. Winning all the spelling bees. Yeah.
Um,
Or they're sitting at home, not doing any school at all. And so they can't even do basic skills. I feel like people assume it's one or the other. What do you say to that?
Well, I'd love to say that that's true in every school situation,
Mhm.
right? So in public school, you have very advanced kids and you have kids that fail out of public school. In private school, same. You have kids that are at the top of the class and kids that are at the bottom of the class. And homeschooling is no different than that. I'd like to say that I think my kids are pretty average. I think certain of them excel at some things and others excel at different things. And it is true that as a homeschool mom, you need to take that responsibility seriously. If you say, I'm going to homeschool, we need to make sure that education is happening. And it might look different for all of us, but we need to love our children enough to make sure that they have an education, right? That they know at least the basics and are pushed on. Depending on your background too, things will be different. So yeah, that's a myth that if your children aren't getting perfect scores on the SAT or your standardized test comes back and not every stay 9 is a 9 or 10, that you're failing. That's ridiculous. Okay. Every child is different. And no matter what school setting you're in, everyone will be different. And I think that with homeschooling, you take the pressure of comparison away a little bit, which I have loved. If my children are the best in the room, I'm glad they don't know. And if they're the worst in the room, I'm glad they don't know. I had a son who scored very poorly on a math section as a 3rd grader in a standardized test. But guess what? He wasn't stupid and he wasn't horrible at math. But if he had been in a traditional school, I think he would have gotten labeled. And because he didn't get labeled, he had no idea. He just knew that mom decided we were going to do some extra facts practice the next year. We were going to beef up on some things. And that's all he knew. And guess what? He's taking business and doing lots of math in his college major. So he is fine and ended up doing through pre-calculus, did fine. So again, stop with the labels, right? Enjoy your children for where they are. Take their education seriously. It matters. It's important. And it's your job for right now. And if you have also have a part-time job on the side, that's fine. But this all somehow, along with help from your husband or others, their education should matter, but they don't have to be super advanced, nor do they need to be down here. Just enjoy them.
Yeah, everyone's experience is their experience with homeschooling. So if they've seen people who just wanted to say they didn't want their kids in public school or in private school for some certain reason, and they decided to homeschool and they really weren't doing anything. It was they just had we're homeschooling. And then when you began to ask questions, you find out they're not really homeschooling, they're at home. But some people do genuinely have that experience of knowing people that have that kind of experience, or they know people that are super invested in beefing up and being super advanced and wanting to, they know what they know. So they have the experience of homeschooling. So there is largely, everything in the middle, just like there is in public school. I had a teacher in public school who recorded first period and played it all day, and he slept under a newspaper. This in 8th grade, an 8th grade history teacher. This is what he did every day. And I had a high school that also slept every single day in class. He was teaching algebra 1, and he slept every single day. And he said, "You're a good student. I'll give you a C." One time he wasn't grading papers. This was what was going on literally in a public school classroom, and in the same building with excellent teachers where things were going very well. So across the board, there are bad apples. And so I think whether, regardless of the background and which category you're in, that's going to happen. So yeah, definitely don't feel pressure to be the most super advanced, and don't, feel like people think that you aren't doing anything. I think people are starting to see that there is a variety of experience and every student is different, and growth in that student is what I'm always after each day. Everybody excels in different areas. Everybody has things that they are really strong, areas they're strong in and that you want to develop. And, my son thinks he needs to play guitar all day, and I'm trying to keep him from doing that, Everyone's going to have their own passions. And so growth in all the areas, even if my son, I felt like the thing that was not his strength, having the time to develop and practice what wasn't his strength in a wise way, where it was a part of our day, was so beneficial. But you don't have to feel like you have to be the most super advanced and knock everybody out with your results.
Yeah, that's so good, Christy, because I was also thinking, don't look at homeschooling as a pixie dust for super amazing academic kids, because that's wrong too. Just because you homeschool doesn't mean they're going to be this crazy advanced. A lot of homeschoolers are very articulate and verbal. And so when those ones talk, it can be impressive. That doesn't mean that they're doing great in math or other things, right? But homeschooling isn't a pixie dust. And again, just like our children aren't born to make us look good. Not every child is a straight A student. Okay. And so even if you have a child who is super bright at something, let's say my kid is getting 100% on all his pre-calculus tests. Well, guess what? He's not learning. He knows it. He already knows it. If he's getting 100% on pre-calc, he's not learning. So I need to be challenging him. And my kids' high school transcripts are not all straight A's. They're not completely way above average in every single subject. It's okay. That's real life. And also, the point of school is learning. Is my child learning? Whether they're on the lower end of the spectrum with their academic